Welcome to Reading and Writing Between the Lines, a podcast series about communication skills in the workplace. I'm your host, John Witzman. Join me as I speak with industry professionals and Conestoga faculty and alumni to explore their journeys with reading and writing skills. Follow us as we talk about how communications learning has changed over the years, how these skills are used in a wide range of industries, and the future of workplace communications. Hello, I'm here today with Ian Dyck, Partner Enablement Lead at Shopify. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, man. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk to you today all about communication skills, academic reading and writing, and how you use those skills in your professional life today. But I want to start by going back to the beginning and asking you, what were these communications reading and writing courses like for you when you were in school? Did you enjoy them? Did you feel connected with them? What was that like for you?
Yeah, for sure. If we were going like all the way back to elementary school, the early days, yeah, definitely. Like I always felt a really strong connection to writing, and even just to language. I was always a very adept speller. And creative writing and reading. I was a voracious reader as a kid.
What kind of things did you like to read?
Mostly fiction. Read a lot of like Bruno and Boots.
I was a big fan of Gordon Corman.
Yeah,
Bruno
Gordon
Boots.
Corman, Farley Mowat.
Oh yeah,
the Owls in the Family stuff. Indian in the Cupboard. Loved Indian in the Cupboard.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
What was it like when you were reading your books and it was clicking for you and you had that assignment and you sort of dove right in? Were you ever aware of, your friend or your neighbor to the side who maybe wasn't? Did you get that sense at the time, or maybe it wasn't until later that was something that clicked for you that maybe didn't click for everyone?
Yeah, well, definitely like specifically on the spelling front, actually. I always found spelling tests to be ridiculous because it just seemed like so simple to me, whereas a lot of my peers struggled with it. I think I have to think that it had to do with the sheer volume of books I was reading and sort of I'm a very visual learner too, so I was able to really just grab those words out of my head and immediately put them on the page.
So did that comfort and connection with the written word and with that form of communication, did that stay with you through secondary and into post-secondary?
I think if I'm being completely honest, I think I actually lost the love of it a little bit in post-secondary because of the sheer volume of reading that I was forced to do.
That's really interesting.
And I haven't really ever recovered, frankly. And then I think, part of the blame there lies with, I think, these phones we have and
Sure.
all the access to media that we have. It sort of replaced that part of my life. It's only very recently that I've really made a concerted effort to try to get back into reading and move away from the screens.
That's so interesting. I definitely want to hear more about that. But first, I wanted to find out, what were you studying when you were in post-secondary?
Communications, in fact, and communications and technology at Brock University.
Okay.
I largely gravitated towards that just because I think I did a general. My first year, I didn't choose a major.
Right.
And then I just went where the things that seemed most interesting to me, and I just went towards that with no view of like my long-term career path or like my ability to make money or anything like that.
Were you getting advice to the contrary?
I was, for sure. If I'm completely transparent, I would have, if not forced by my parents into something a little bit more practical, I probably would have ended up in the arts. I would have ended up in film or television production, or something more creative.
You still have that connection from the early days, reading, taking in all those stories.
I do. Like I made as a kid, as a teen, and I made a series of films with my high school buddies.
Fun.
And loved it. Did all the editing, all the writing. I actually won with a close friend of mine. We won a Waterloo County script writing award.
Oh, cool.
For Funky Squad 2, The Pants Come Off. But yeah, so
was there a Funky Squad 1, or did you just jump right into the sequel?
No, we're not that clever. There was a Funky Squad 1.
But it was the sequel where you really clicked.
It was where we actually like really dove into creating a proper like script.
Yeah. So you said that you kind of felt a little burnt out in your post-secondary experience.
Definitely,
and it was partly because you felt sort of overloaded. What kind of things were you being asked to read and write? Was it more technical, like textbooks that you were reading, or was it you were being asked to read fiction and comment on that?
Yeah, it was both because I did. We studied like Marshall McLuhan and a lot of theory, a lot of theory stuff and advertising stuff, advertising theory. But then we also did. There was a film component too, where we did film studies. So where we would watch fictional stuff,
analyze
it, and read into it. And it was really just it was just the stress associated with it too, like the timelines and I have vivid memories as well of like, because like also computer technology was not that good back then.
Sure.
And so, I remember a few times I was like partway through finishing a massively long essay and my computer crashed and I lost like the 10 pages that I had just spent 8 hours writing. And so like I had a lot of like really like frustrated and anxiety ridden feelings associated with my reading and writing. And as a consequence, I definitely like once I sort of got away from that, I was like, I just like had a bad taste in my mouth about it. But, in subsequent years, I realized like, learning is not something you stop doing at university.
Certainly the lifelong learner is a profile that is often sought after and encouraged and yet it's kind of inevitable, right? We're learning good habits, we're learning new skills, useful skills, or we're sort of learning things that could be like with the phones, right?
Absolutely.
And just staring at the screen. I feel like I have also started to learn in a direction that I don't necessarily want to be going.
Habits are habit forming.
Very well said. I want to just explore a little bit more in this period of your life because there are so many things that you're saying that I think would really resonate for students who are taking academic reading and writing courses today. In particular, how you felt when you had these assignments, that feeling of anxiety or stress. What was your process like? Were you a last minute, all night writer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I would not always. I think sometimes if a topic really truly interested me and I sort of like felt a connection to it, then I think I would be able to get a jump start on it. I was not a good student though. I often, pulled all-nighters and got extensions and waited to the last minute to do things. And I definitely also I was thinking about this actually before this, that I was often guilty of pulling the old, adding in extra words to like really, fluff up a piece, or, changing the spacing to just slightly like a decimal point, like 1.15, just to like get a little bit of extra page count on a really long piece. So yeah, I definitely, I sort of definitely did what I had to do and did the bare minimum when I could.
Those are certainly common things, but as an educator, I want to go back and provide a little bit of comfort and solace to the student that you have described as not a good student.
Yeah.
I think that we could, outside of being self-deprecating, both agree that the good-bad student dichotomy is perhaps a little bit not true, and that students are stressed, students are trying to do a lot of work with not enough time, and so we do resort to bad habits or to shortcuts. But I really wanted to talk about how your experience in those kinds of courses and developing those kinds of skills relate to the work that you do now. But before I take us there, I just wanted to ask you about the experience that you had reading textbooks in your post-secondary experience, reading the advertising theory or the communications theory. How did that compare to all the reading that you did when you did that voracious reading as a kid? did you lean back in your chair with your advertising textbook the same way you did with your Farley Mowat? Or did you?
No.
What was that like? Do you remember?
No, it was very different. Like, I would say I would characterize my fiction reading as enjoyable, and flow state was achieved, and I descended into the universe, into the world of the book, and lost myself, lost time,
right,
and everything else kind of melted away, and I didn't know it at the time, but I now know how important that is, how important for your brain health of being able to sort of fall into this flow state is good for you. It's like a meditative practice almost.
Yeah.
And so it was very natural and easy, and it was something that I sought out and I loved to do. And whereas learning this other stuff, while it was like interesting,
you knew it was something that you might need, or
it was interesting to me. It was like not my choice really. It was something that was being foisted upon me, and it was dry in a lot of cases. Like there was some really interesting stuff that was, that I learned about, communication theory around like, how best to package communications, and how to, also like even who ends up in your social network, and it has to do, one of the strongest indicators of that is proximity. It's like how close, like this is why I'm here today, is I live across the street from you.
Yeah.
So, so that kind of stuff really stuck with me and was interesting, but a lot of it was very dry, and there was not really like a really like attractive narrative or character development or crisis and resolution and all the stuff that you like in a good story. It just was a different format, and so I definitely had to choke it down a bit as medicine, as opposed to like eating it up like something I wanted to eat.
I think it's probably another experience that most people can relate to in their role as a student, and I think it's probably a great opportunity for us to talk about your work now.
Sure.
You work for Shopify, and I'm sure that there are all kinds of ways where you are communicating with people inside your organization, outside your organization. What kind of connection can you draw looking back between the experiences you had in school, developing these skills, and the work that you do now? Do you find yourself drawing on those skills a lot? Yeah,
I would say like only. It's funny. I often in jest say that I use very little from what I learned in school in my current job. But I mean, realistically, I think so much of schooling is, a lot of people will sort of malign education and say that, I barely use anything that I learned. But I think so much of education is learning how to learn.
Yep.
And being able to ingest a large volume of information and really distill it down to its core and really understand it in a meaningful way and make an argument about it. And so I would say like my sort of adventures in taking in those huge amount, those like unsavory texts, and then having to write essays about it and do exams and stuff about it, that really did sort of like sharpen those skills. And it's funny because I mentioned, I added in a lot of like fluff to increase the word count. Now
you have to take it out.
I have to take it out. Like so much of communications in my current life is again taking in huge amounts of information from multiple sources and distilling it down to its absolute like essence.
Right.
And because there's no room for flowery language when you're trying to convey value or convey like a project or a mission or an objective to an executive, like someone who's above you, who has like, you think you're busy, like they have so much less time and so many more people demanding their attention.
So they need you to be concise.
You need to be super, super duper concise, and really just get to the heart of the matter through all kinds of mediums of communication. So we're talking about, emails, instant messages, but also the real language of Shopify anyways, and I can't speak to other tech organizations, but I can only assume is project briefs. So is really, really forming an argument. Why are you doing this? What are you doing? How will you do it? What is the timeline? and get it as short as you possibly can. If you can get it on one page, that's the ideal situation.
Would that be in a Word doc that is sent as an attachment?
Yeah, it's more like we actually have an internal tool that houses all of them. And every week it's asking you for an update, and that gets sent out in various channels. And leadership is constantly checking on each team's projects and how they're progressing. So
that's so fascinating to me. I have so many questions about writing these project briefs. Do you find that you have become better at writing that particular style of writing over time through practice? Do you find yourself getting it right the first time, or do you edit them in sort of successive drafts? What does that process look like?
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely gotten better just out of necessity. And it's a majorly iterative process. Like,
can you think of anything that you maybe did in the early days writing project briefs that you identified later on as being something that you needed to change or correct?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I was still sort of really, they were not lean enough.
Right.
Basically, they were. You talk about a thing and then you talk around it,
Sure.
and then you add in some additional context, and like it's like the feedback that I always would get is like, there's too much there. You need to really, really sharpen that and shorten it, and really identify the problem.
When you're producing one, do you have a kind of rough draft where you get all of those thoughts down on the paper and then you cross stuff out?
Yeah, for sure. So there's sort of a template that is offered to everybody to use, and it's like what the first question is: what problem are you trying to solve? How will this add value to Shopify? We also have these like core tenets of like, be a constant learner, get shit done is actually one of our not sorry to curse on your podcast.
But that's a Shopify motto.
It was actually, funnily enough, it was actually in when we went public, it was in our, like, the documents. So it was like the first time a curse word was ever in someone's
really
public company documents.
Actually, that's I think something worth discussing in the context of academic reading and writing skills and academic communications. How do you see that sort of line between the things that you did in school and the things that you do in the professional world? Do you see that line as being sort of fuzzy and blurry? Like, is there a lot of overlap between the language of the classroom and the language of the boardroom, if you will, or do you feel like the language and the styles of communication that people use in a fast-paced business environment, a modern tech connected business world, is that somehow more real or more cutting edge than an academic kind of context?
I suppose it would depend on the subject,
Sure, that makes sense.
Like that someone is studying. But I think, like, for me, I think at its core, it's these things that we're talking about is precise and concise communication is a universal language, and I think I definitely see a lot of parallels there, and so much of the job is so much of my success in my career at all is because of my communication skills, and I've definitely seen people that. It's not an absolute necessity. There's a lot of in fact, there's a lot of people that I will speak to that like malapropisms like abound.
Right.
Like,
so they use the wrong word. They're trying to use a fancy word.
They're trying to use a fancy word and they use it totally wrong. They still get the point across. I cringe a little bit inside,
Sure.
but I don't call them out because I don't want to be a jerk. But I notice, and I think a little bit less of them.
Well, it's a really, I think, fruitful area for conversation in a business landscape where promotions are competitive and people's reputations are kind of always being formed
Sure.
in the public sphere. Do you get the sense that people are judged or evaluated based on their ability to be concise, to be precise, to be accurate?
For sure. It's a rich tapestry, right? Like,
Sure.
if someone who might not be like, I'm thinking of a particular person who I admire greatly, who does this a lot, but they have other skills that make up for that.
Right.
They have amazing content production abilities. The decks that they create are like the visual, like while they might not be great at using words, their ability to take visual language and turn it into understanding is like next level, like so far beyond me.
Yep.
So I think there's ways that you can make up for it if you lack that particular skill. For me, that has been my superpower is the ability to really, really clearly communicate to people and read people based on their what they're telling me and their visual cues.
Yeah.
And so I've really been able to, and so again, like so much of it is every company, like no matter what your job is, you have to collaborate. You have to collaborate with your peers.
Yeah.
And the ability to empathize and to understand and to echo back what you're hearing, like quickly take what they're saying to you and be like, okay, what I'm hearing is this, and have them nod in agreement. Yes, you get me. Like that is worth its weight in gold. Like the ability to get buy-in and to get alignment through these quick communications, and then more broadly then when you document it and you put it into a project brief or whatever, that's the sort of like end result of that collaboration and that early stage communication.
I think that is a great way of sort of grounding or cashing out all that work at the earlier stages. That idea that you could be doing these kinds of calculations on the fly. I sometimes think of it like a mathematical education, that a student at the preliminary levels will be doing some arithmetic or some calculations on the paper with their pen, and then over time will be able to do those calculations in their head and quickly, and then you build on that, and that allows you to do something faster, more complicated.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's like anything. The more you practice it, the better you get at it, and I've practiced it a lot I've been at Shopify for 7 years now, and I've been in sort of like the corporate tech world for, I want to say, 17 years, 18 years.
Can we talk about the sort of relationship between tech specifically, the corporate tech world specifically, and these communication skills sort of broadly? I'm very interested in it, in part because I tend to teach to students who are in the School of Information Technology at Conestoga, and I think that it's a really interesting sort of intersection point, because this is a world that is perhaps sometimes thought to be defined by an entirely different kind of language and a different mode of thinking and communicating altogether. But is that what you see in the tech world? Are there some of those stereotypes out there in your experience, or do people inside have a different sort of opinion of how these skills could be perhaps complementary?
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to communicating. That said, there's certainly lingo and industry specific stuff that you need to know about to be able to communicate properly. There's like a ridiculous compendium of abbreviations and acronyms that you need to know. And in fact, actually, from our leadership, there is a no acronyms policy, because
that's great.
The amount of people that will say some sort of abstract acronym or abbreviation, I should say.
Yeah.
And then nobody wants to sound stupid and be like, what is that? Right. I always will, though. If I don't know what an acronym is or the abbreviation is, I'm like, I don't know what that means. Not having having a low fear of looking stupid in front of my peers is also one of my superpowers. But I think broadly speaking, I haven't found there to be it's hard for me to abstract it, because I've been in it for so long.
Sure. Do you see people who have you spoke about that colleague who had this knack for visual communication and could still communicate ideas, distill ideas in a way that was perhaps more visual than the written word, but they were perhaps doing the same kind of project. They were achieving the same purpose through perhaps a different set of tools. can you think of people that you've encountered along the way in the sort of tech corporate space who have a really strong set of coding skills or programming skills or technical skills broadly, but whether it's visual or written, do lack that ability to convey ideas, communicate with other people, and have struggled in their careers as a result? You've seen that?
Absolutely. And I mean, like, that's a pretty, like, not to generalize, but people that have a natural proclivity for coding or for engineering often will be insufficient or lack in other aspects. In
the same way that I had an affinity or felt an affinity to the written, to the sort of communication area, but sometimes felt really out of my depth in kind of technical.
Totally, and I'm that's a very accurate descriptor of me as well. Yeah. I can sort of like, I can hang a bit in the technical lingo, but I very quickly get out of my depth. And so, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. It's funny though, you do encounter some people though that have both, and they are referred to as unicorns.
Is that right?
Yes, they are. I know a few of them. I'm still even people that are at Shopify and have left Shopify that I've stayed in touch with, that are like, they really don't seem to have any deficits of any kind.
Let's talk about unicorns for a minute, because that's a great image, and I want to produce more unicorns as an educator. When I have students in my class who are excelling in their program courses, software engineering, computer programming, what have you, I really feel motivated to try to add to their skill set that's already really sharp in these other areas, and allow them to leave their post-secondary experience with that full suite of skills, so that they can be that unicorn. I wonder, though, how best to help them. What do you think are the I'm gonna mine you for some free curriculum planning advice. What do you think students in 2023 should be doing in their communications courses at the post-secondary level to help them do the kinds of work that you think that they'll be doing when they enter the workforce in that tech corporate world? Yeah,
that's a really tough question. I think to your first point, like, how do you create unicorns? I think it really has to come from within, because I think in general humans tend to gravitate towards the things that they have natural proclivities for.
Sure.
They're like, that, I'm good at that right away.
Yeah.
So I want to just do that. And so I think people that get into programming, it's because they have a knack for it. And then they're like, cool, I can just make money this way, and I don't need to worry about these other things. And then maybe later in life they'll round it out a little bit more, but it has to be a desire, or you have to be told by an educator that there is value in moving towards the challenging things. There's a really good book that I haven't read, but I've been told about. It's called The Obstacle is the Way. And it's all, it has been summarized to me as essentially, go towards the things that are hard, go towards the things that are difficult, because that, when you put yourself in these uncomfortable situations, that's how you grow and that's how you learn. And then to your, I totally railroaded that into a different direction.
No, that's great. The obstacle is the way, I think, as a motto, is certainly something that a person who's made it to the other side of an obstacle can embrace. And when you're on the sort of the before side of the obstacle, it could seem almost like on its face that kind of idea is ridiculous, because that's a big obstacle. I'm going to go elsewhere. I'm going to be more like water and just flow where I can, where that feels good. And it's hard. It's something that, it's a mental fortitude thing that you really have to develop, I think, and see the value in, to see the other side. Your other question was to do with, how can students prepare for the future of corporate communication? And we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but it's very hard for me to predict because of AI. Yeah, let's go there. So how do you see things changing in the workspace now? what's going on?
Yeah. So right now it's really more like, it's not like, there's all this hand wringing going on around like, oh, we're going to be replaced. And we might be.
Sure. By artificial intelligence.
By artificial intelligence. It's so funny Shopify is really adopting a lot of AI practices. We have our own instance of ChatGPT that people can use.
Wow.
And on a recent company-wide communication, a very sci-fi sentence was said, and it was just, rest assured, everybody, there will always be a place for humans at this company.
That is chilling.
And I was just like, oh, was that supposed to make me feel better?
Did that assure you?
That did not assure me at all. I assumed that because I am a human and we're all humans. Anyways, so
yes.
I thought that was pretty funny. But
do you think that was written by a human, or do you think
who the hell knows? I definitely have used it a bunch, right? Like,
do you tell me about that? How do you use it?
So it's more like it's like an assistant, right? It's a way to augment your productivity, basically at this point, where you can take a huge email thread or a huge Slack thread, which is the instant messaging system that we use, and you can copy and paste it right into a ChatGPT window, and then say, summarize this for me. And it will, in seconds, say, so-and-so said this, this was, they want you to do this, this is, so-and-so said this. And
they'll refer to names?
They'll refer to names, and they get it. They get it.
It's accurate.
Spot on, accurately. And it'll produce like a paragraph of a complete distillation of what we were just talking about, distilling large amounts of information.
Yes.
So now that doesn't replace me. What it does is it allows me to move quicker and save bandwidth and time. So we're outsourcing a lot of those skills to ChatGPT. What will the long-term effects of that be?
Yes.
Who knows? Because I'm not doing it anymore, and my brain isn't being flexed to do that anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that you would be able to use that summary that ChatGPT has produced? Do you think you'd be able to use it effectively, or even recognize that it was a good summary, if you hadn't already developed the ability to do that synthesis yourself? That's
a great question.
It's hard to know, of course.
It's hard to know, but yeah, for sure. I would have to assume no. And so yeah, right now it's a bit of a novelty, and it's like this like sort of digital assistant. You can also do crazy things like, hopefully my direct reports don't listen to this, but like for their performance reviews, I had a list of all the things they had achieved, and I had a list of actually for my own performance. You write these things called self-reflections as well when you're doing impact reviews at Shopify. And so for my own one, I basically wrote all the things my team had achieved. I wrote all the job I copied and pasted all the job requirements of my role. I threw it into a ChatGPT thing, and I said, write a performance review for me. This is my job. These are the things I achieved. These are the things that are expected of me.
Yes.
And it produced a beautiful symphony of just singing my praises. And I'd say it was about 90% there. And then I had to tweak it a bit. There was a few garbled nonsense.
This is what I've heard. Yeah. And I heard it recently from a friend who I really respect and admire as a thinker and as a writer. And he told me that he uses it in a very similar way, and he summarizes and synthesizes with it, and then will do a pass to change 10%, 15% just to make it right and in his voice, perhaps a little bit. I actually want to come back to that idea of voice in a second, but first, I'm curious to know technically about what that text box looks like when you're input. Sounds like you're inputting actually a lot of parameters to this request, this prompt. Are you formatting that in the way that you would format a document? Is the list of things bulleted? Is the heading bolded?
No, very little formatting is required.
Is that right?
It can really figure out a lot from very, very poor, janky formatting.
Okay.
I did bullet the list. But I used like a semicolon.
Yep.
But I've done it very sloppily before, and it still produces amazing results. But yeah, you do wonder, for right now, these people that grew up without it and developed those skills and are using it, that's one thing. But like 30 years in the future, people that grew up with it and will they actually be able to identify if something is good or not? Based on the outputs of it, but it's tough to say, and it also seems to be increasing in efficacy.
It's getting better.
Weekly.
Yes, for sure.
So, we could have the same conversation in a year and it would be a totally different ballgame. From what I have heard, I think that the thing that people should really focus on and get really good at is being a ChatGPT whisperer.
Right, writing the prompts.
Is writing the prompts, figuring out the prompts. Because right now it can't think of the thing to do. It can just, once you feed it inputs,
right.
It's just a language prediction tool. And so it just like, it takes what we're talking about, like ingesting large amounts of information. It takes like the entirety of human history and knowledge,
right.
and uses that as its base material, something we can never compete with.
So I want to ask you a dangerous question and it's dangerous, I think, because I don't know what your answer is going to be.
Sure.
What would you say, based on your experience working at Shopify and having worked in the tech corporate space for a long time, what would you say to somebody who's in their post-secondary education right now, approaching a career like yours? What would you say to somebody who thinks or says, I don't need to spend time layering in all of those skills, doing the thing that you described as being kind of painstaking and time-consuming, getting in all those repetitions to develop this ability to do those calculations in my head. I don't need to spend that time and do that work because I have access to this tool that's going to do it for me. How accurate is that assessment? Because I have to think that it's not entirely wrong, right? We have to acknowledge that this is an incredible tool, and it would be folly to ignore that it exists altogether and not use it when we don't have all the time that we want. And at the same time, it can't be I couldn't endorse such an extreme characterization as I don't need to do any of this.
Yeah.
What do you think that middle ground looks like?
That is a super challenging question because
It is, right?
Because I don't even know I could say what I think the middle ground looks like, and then in a month that could totally be invalidated. People really are underestimating, I think, how absolutely game changing this will be.
Yeah.
It's akin to any other massive leap forward. It's almost bigger than the creation of the internet. It's bigger than the printing press. It's bigger than all these big things that sort of rendered certain occupations obsolete. And we don't even really understand the full implications of it yet. I like to think that, a lot of the soft skills that I have cannot be replicated by a computer, but who knows,
right,
man? Maybe it can. So to your question, I think I don't know, that it's a very sort of, in some ways it's a bit of a myopic view that, I won't need this for my ability to make money and therefore I won't need it.
Right.
I think that in general, so many of my communication skills are used outside of my work and with my relationships and with my friends and with my family.
Yeah.
And so I think still developing those are key, but to your earlier point too, the ability to I don't know that if you didn't have those skills, I don't know if you would be able to reverse engineer a prompt very well to even elicit a positive, a useful response from this AI. You need to sort of you need to have some sense of it in order to even work backwards and be okay, I want this. I want it to look like this. Here's the prompt I'm going to deliver. And then to your earlier point, to even be able to identify, is this garbled nonsense talk, or is it something that is actually useful and spot on that it's produced?
I'm grateful to you for that addition to the conversation that you just made now, where you said that there's a part of you outside of your work, which is of course so obvious, and yet it's easy to overlook when we have these very important priorities, whether it's from an educational perspective, like my own, being part of the development of somebody who wants to become productive in the workplace, or whether it's you who has workplace responsibilities by virtue of what your job is. It's easy to overlook the fact that we exist outside those jobs
and that we do those jobs and we seek out that income in order to sustain this full life, to be happy.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would say for the past 7 years, how this has been mostly useful and mostly employed is through my most important job that I have, which is a father to 3 daughters.
Wow.
Because so much of parenting is, some parents adopt the strategy of when something is like just absolutely mind-bendingly complex,
Right.
to just say, kid, just
Right.
forget it.
Yes.
I'll tell it to you when you're older. I try to go towards the obstacle when in those situations, and I try to, as much as I can, really, really simplify and distill. And with kids, as I'm sure you know as well, you can't talk too much about a thing before they are like, they just eyes glaze over and they check out. So you have like a very short window to be like, okay, let me see. It's kind of like this,
right?
To really frame it and tee it up for them in a way that their little brains can properly ingest it and actually derive any type of understanding or meaning from.
It's an incredible connection that you're making and bringing us full circle in such a wonderful way, because the child as the inscrutable text that we began with, right? The textbook that is dense and hard to pull information out of, or the project brief that you have to condense and strip away everything that's extraneous and say only what's essential. And you don't have the template to sort of go over here on the side and jot down 20 ideas and scratch out the 12 that don't work.
And also your audience has so little understanding of the various complexities that go into, like, it's like you start explaining and like, well, okay, wait, you need a baseline understanding of this thing before I can even explain that thing. So I have to you have to really distill and simplify like numerous elements as you're explaining this to the child. And so, it's and doing it on the fly and don't get me wrong, I'm not some expert at it. I mess it up so often. I know that their eyes glaze over because I've seen it happen so many times. I'm like, sure. Okay. All right. I went too long on that one. Yeah.
I'm familiar with that glazed over look, but I think it's a terrific place to end our conversation. This idea that those lines, those distinctions between the classroom and the boardroom, and between the workplace and the personal, that those lines are blurry, that they're artificial, that we use communication skills in our personal life in a way that helps us to be better at our jobs, that we use sort of formal communication skills in more informal communication situations at the workplace and all throughout our day, and it's all kind of one big soup of clarity and precision and conciseness, or it can be a hard, challenging experience if you're struggling to understand what you're supposed to do with this government agency, how to fill out that form. It can be really challenging and probably confusing or disorienting, frustrating, and that there's a real use value for these skills from beginning to end.
Yeah, I would say like we as humans, we all just want to understand and be understood. And at our core, and that's how you create connection, and connection is life.
I couldn't wrap it up any better. Thank you so much, Ian, for those closing thoughts and for being here today and talking about these things with us.
Awesome. Really great to be here, and I'm so happy we did this.
And that marks the end of another episode of Reading and Writing Between the Lines, a podcast hosted by me, John Witzman, on behalf of the Communications Department and School of Interdisciplinary Studies at Conestoga College. You can find other episodes of this series on our YouTube channel, Reading and Writing Between the Lines. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks for listening.